Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Witten, and today I have a very special, very unique podcast for you on grief and how that impacts your health, how it impacts your energy, and how it impacts your life more broadly outside of that, and how to do the process of life re-entry. So today, my guest is Christina Rasmussen, who I had the pleasure of meeting about a year ago, and who is just a wonderful powerhouse of a woman. And she is the creator and founder of the Life Reentry Institute, Second Firsts, and Star Letters. She's on a crusade to help millions of people rebuild, reclaim, and relaunch their lives using the power of their own minds. And her work has been featured on ABC News, NPR, the White House blog, and mariashriver.com. She's the best-selling author of Second Firsts, Live, Laugh, and Love Again, and is currently working on her second book on expanding the mind in ways that allow co-creation with the forces of the universe. So Christina, welcome. Such a pleasure to have you on finally.
Ari, so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been meaning to do this for like over a year. I planned to do this initially after meeting you a little over a year ago, and the timing just didn't work out. And I reached out to you again recently, and I'm glad we were able to finally connect and make this happen.
Yes, indeed. It's the right time now.
Yeah. So as I mentioned to you before we started recording, and I want to do something a little interesting in this interview that's unusual. I want to read some of the quotes from your book because your writing is just so beautiful. And I had such a pleasure of reading this book. It's really an amazing book as far as the content, but as far as the writing as well. I mean, as I mentioned to you, I'm not grieving myself, so I don't have that sort of personal motivation to read this. But it just grabbed my attention and was such a fascinating and well-written book that I loved it. And so this quote really jumped out to me at the beginning. It says, "I have lived in the shadow of loss, the kind of loss that can paralyze you forever. I have grieved like a professional mourner in every waking moment, draining every ounce of my life force. I died without leaving my body, but I came back, and now it's your turn. I've learned to remember my past without living in it. I'm strong, electric, and alive because I chose to dance, to laugh, to love, and to live again. I've learned that you can't recreate the life you once had. You have to reinvent a life for yourself. And that reinvention is a gift, not a curse. I believe your future self is a work of art and that science can help you create it." Yes. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
I have to say, I wish I could write like you, but I think this encapsulates the whole message so beautifully. So I think to start off with, I would love if you could talk a bit about your personal story. In what you said, you've lived in the shadow of loss, the kind of loss that can paralyze you forever. So can you talk a bit about what that was all about and what led you on this path that got you interested in grief and grieving and how people can get stuck and not re-enter life?
Yes. Ari, I was 30 years old, married to this incredible human being, head over heels in love with him. He was 31, I was 30. At the time, we were living in California, and then we moved to Boston. We were in an adventure. We loved life. We had 2 children, a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old baby. And one day, his name was Biana. He was from Denmark. Imagine this 6'4" guy who looked like healthy and well. He said to me one day, "I have something here on my neck," and there was a lump there. And I said, "That's so strange." It was just shocking, actually, just out of the blue. And he went to the doctor, they biopsied it, and they thought it was probably lymphoma, but what it was colon cancer. Stage 4 colon cancer. And as you know, colon cancer is very rare at such a young age. They gave him at the time 6 months, but we fought. until we couldn't fight it anymore, and he passed 3.5 years after that day. And I remember, Ari, really clearly that I wished it was me that had died. The pain of losing him. And I remember saying to everyone, I'm in love with a dead man. How can love continues? It just goes on when you love someone so much. And I didn't think I would make it. I had the 2 little girls at the time. When he did die, they were 4 and 6 years old. I was living in Boston by myself. I got a job. I was a single mom, no help from anyone. And I started my journey back to reentry. And Ari, I couldn't believe that I lived in a world that had so much suffering and nobody was doing anything about it. I was shocked. And that's when I said to myself, if I ever make it back, I'm going back to get everyone else.
Nice. I love that. So what was it, and I'm sure this, or maybe it was a single event, or maybe it was more of a process, but what was it that helped you transition out of your own kind of being stuck in the grief of that loss to re-entering life, and then to go on this mission of going back and getting everybody else as well?
Yeah. So there's a story that I tell, and I've shared a lot about the mailman, and I don't know if we have time to share this here, but the way I share this with people is that I've discovered this place, and I don't know if is this interview going to be just audio or video, because I know both. I've discovered this place. So when something bad happens to our lives, Ari, whether it's a traditional loss like the death of my husband, or a job loss, or something happened to you in your life, rejection, abandonment, all of your listeners, actually all of them at 100%, including you, have gone through something that has been difficult in your life. And I call those moments the moment of impact, that you've been impacted. When that happens, when something really tough and terrible happens, we actually get exited from our old life. And we don't automatically go to the new one. We go in a place in between that I call the waiting room. And I know you've heard many people say, just give it time, Ari. Just, you need time to heal. You need time to think. So the brain hijacks that moment, not the heart, actually. The brain comes and says, this place in between, that is the waiting room, is actually better than actually trying to rebuild your new life. Just wait here. You're not feeling well. Just rest. And we start a life that is in the gap. And millions of people die there.
And yeah, it's interesting because on the one hand, we've all experienced this kind of natural tendency for time to pass and for us to kind of recover from wounds. That often happens that way. But it also often seems to happen that a person may just get stuck, or that a person may have some kind of trauma or stressor, and that is actually the catalyst for their health really taking a nosedive, and then for them to get some kind of, for it to just get worse and worse and worse. Their energy tanks, they may have chronic fatigue, they may get other diseases. It can go both ways. And then I think also, given what we know about neuroplasticity, it just doesn't seem to make that much sense to me that you would just say to somebody, hey, just give it time and it'll heal itself. Because we know that kind of neurons that fire together wire together. And that if you want to get back to a good place, it seems like you would kind of have to consciously practice being in that new, wiring in those new neural pathways. And yet, if you try to, it doesn't feel right to do that too soon, right? We feel like almost we're dishonoring the person if we get back to being happy too soon after a loss.
And Ari, you said something really important. Other things can happen that gets us in this place in between, stuck, and I call those things invisible losses. because they are invisible to everyone else, to yourself. And something happens in life that doesn't have that traditional name of like a divorce or a death, but something happens to someone that's invisible, quiet, and silent. And they're in that place, and they're just waiting to feel better tomorrow. Maybe another day I'll feel better so I can go and get that new job or start my new life, and they don't, and they stay there. Neuroplasticity is my favorite topic in the world. This is why I actually got out, and I'm going to share the story that I wanted to share. But before I shared it, I wanted people to understand the concept of the waiting room. It was about 1.5 years after the death, and I was still in a lot of pain and suffering a lot. I mean, this doesn't go away. It just doesn't. You don't just re-enter or feel better. And I hope it's okay. Is it okay? Do we have time to share this story?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you probably read it in the book. I used to live in Boston. We had a lot of snow outside, actually mountains of snow, and the mailman hadn't been able to deliver the mail because I didn't shovel outside of my house. One day I say to the girls, we're going to shovel. Let's go and make space for the mailman, his little car, to stop right outside and deliver a mail. And we shoveled. That was actually a big thing for me then. I worked a job at the corporate world. I was a single mom. Having time to do that was a big deal. I did it. We measured the space. It was a lot. It was big enough. We went back to the house, and I see the mailman driving, approaching my house, looks at the space that I had just created with the girls, and moves away, does not deliver my mail. In my depressed mind and devastating mind, the waiting room thoughts that I call the survivor self, the part of us that's trying to keep us safe and protected from all this pain and keeps us stuck, said to me in that moment in time, you can't even get your mail. Your life is so bad. You just need to just sit and cry here on the couch. And a new thought came in. And this is how we slowly get out and said, and everyone who's listening to this, there are moments in our lives that they have two options. One is to just sit and retreat. Another is to do something different. And another thought came in and said, Christina, the hell with that. Put on your snow boots and start running. And Ari, I ran 4 blocks to catch him with his car. So he this is how I exited the waiting room the first time. So he would drive the car and, put the packages in the mailbox and just drive away. So I would catch up with him, but not quite. And he could see me in the mirror. Because I wasn't jogging, right? I didn't have my sneakers on. This was snow filled. I actually had
running, waving your arms,
running like this. So I said to myself, he's got to stop at some point to deliver a package, right? So actually, he does 4 blocks down. He gets out of the car, delivers the package, and I am like getting there. I got there out of breath, mascara running down my eyes. He comes from the house, and I'm on this side of the car. He's on the other side. He said, how can I help you? Basically, I've seen you running. And he said, and I said, you didn't deliver my mail. And he's like, there was no space for me to deliver your mail. And I said, but I shoveled. He goes, you didn't shovel well enough. I said, we shoveled really well. And he goes, you should have asked your husband to do it. And in that moment in time, I really said to him, he would if he could, but he's dead. Give me back my mail. He went white. But that moment changed my whole life, Ari. That moment, I re-entered. I went after whatever it was that was mine. And thousands of people have written to me when they read the mailman story, or they have their own version. It's not the mailman. It's a personal work that they finally tell them what they think, or their boss, or a neighbor, or whatever that is. We actually reclaim our life from that gap, from that passive, pitiful place of circumstances, and we slowly. This was not a slow exit. This was a little bit of a hurricane. I mean, I look like a crazy woman, but for me, that's what was required, the time to exit that waiting room. And after that day, and you asked the question, what was the moment? After that day, I think I started slowly to ask for what I wanted and have intention around it. And that was my first time out and into the new life.
Wow.
Yes, crazy story. I don't normally chase down mailmen, but
unless they're exceptionally good looking.
That's true. You know, we wave at them, they stop longer time. Yes, but he wasn't a good looking mailman either. But, but yeah, that's how I exited. Yeah.
So what do you think it is, or what do you think are the critical sort of factors that determine whether a person re-enters life or stays stuck in the waiting room, or you know, even worse, takes a nosedive where it just gets worse and worse and worse? What have you found any kind of personality traits or life circumstances that kind of form a pattern in which a person might be more inclined towards life re-entry?
Yes, actually, I teach this to my life re-entry practitioners. We teach this to professionals. One day, every therapist, hospital, hospice, corporation will have life re-entry benefits and services, and that's true. Actually, we're doing it. It's happening.
I love that. It's so needed. This is
not a maybe anymore. The work is being studied by a 3-year brain study. Amazing, Ari. There's a lot of great things. Beautiful. So I've determined I created 3 different personalities. One is the attached type. The other one is what I call the limbo type. And another one is complete. And we teach our professionals to detect the type of personality that you are. The attached personality is the type of person, and know you've met them, that they actually identify with being a victim. They identify with the trauma more than they ever did with anything else, Ari. Yeah. Don't you know people like that?
Yes, I do.
You see them everywhere. And so the characteristics of that is that they like to retell their story. That is the way they introduce themselves. This is the way they communicate. This is how they get out of things. That person cannot actually, and does not want, the waiting room is actually their best place to be, their highlight. So we can't help those. Then we have
so you just flat out say, we can't help you if you are completely identified as being a victim, and you are basically addicted to your own suffering.
Yes, and I know it's horrible to say, right? But we can't help them.
I mean, this is just true. I mean, I've done a PhD program in clinical psychology. I've seen this many times and studied it, you know, and it goes by different names. And oftentimes we talk about masochistic tendencies and things like that, masochistic defense mechanisms as far as ego defense mechanism. But that is one valid way of defending the ego that some people have learned as their best strategy for defending their ego and not feeling wounded, is they become addicted to their own story of trauma, their own suffering, and identified with being a victim.
Yes, and they actually tell you they need to be rescued and that they're suffering and nobody's helping them. But actually that is not the truth. The truth is that they just want to say that part and express that part and receive the attention from that part, but they don't want to be helped. And Ari, I'm a bit of a nerd, so because we've identified those human beings from thousands of people who have taken my classes and they've done the work. I know exactly the place in the life re-entry process they will go, and then they will go up to a certain point, Ari, and then they will reset.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
They just refuse to go any further. Yeah.
They can't. And there's 2 things. There's the personality type and so on, but also their brain is so heavy on automatic identification of that trauma that's been revisited millions of times. And you know about the maps in the brain, that there's just the more they're visited, the stronger they get, and we can never get rid of them. That's the easy way that's the more scientific way to look at them, I guess. But they will not. They will reset, and they can't go beyond that stage. And I know I can't help them. I would give them, it's very rare actually, but there's probably 1 or 2 people in every class like this. It's actually not a large number that is the complete attached type, which is good news.
Yeah. So what are it's 2 other personality types?
Yeah, the limbo, which is the person that makes it, and then it's gravitated back in again. And if they don't jump into the work, they'll stay there. It's a risky personality because they have what it takes to get out. They have resilience. They have the ability. They have the want, the wish, the dreams, the passion. But they also have the comfort within that waiting room. And we're actually fighting between what I call the survivor self, which is the automatic brain, maps that make the fear center of our brain, and the thriver self, which is the new baby maps that are being created in the brain that actually escort you out of the waiting room fast if you let them. So we have this limbo in kind of dancing that goes back and forth, and we want to make sure that we rescue them, that we help them, and then the complete type. And I bet you are one of those, Ari. The complete type is they do the work. It's hard what they've been through. And you see people like that. They do mourn. They do grieve. It's hard. They have a heart. They experience sorrow and loss and pain. But they do the work and actually create even a better life than they ever had before.
Mm. Yeah, it's a fascinating phenomenon. I've always been fascinated with people who have brushes with death due to their own health problems, like health scares, whether they have cancer or they have a heart attack or whatever. And they come out of this very negative, painful, traumatic experience with a new lease on life. And they all of a sudden see the world with fresh eyes, and they realize how many things they've taken for granted. And they now live in so much of a better life and become better people as a result of this negative experience. It's kind of this very, I mean, we all know of it, and it's a very common thing, and yet it's also this very weird phenomenon that humans have to go through such a horrible experience. Yes. In order to become good people and happy people oftentimes.
It's amazing. If I hadn't, and actually the part that I didn't share is that I used to be a grief therapist. I mean, my thesis was on the stages of bereavement for my master's. And before this happened,
oh, wow.
I didn't know this was going to happen in my life. And I was so, I'm the worst griever, right? I'm actually the person that I couldn't imagine loving people and losing them, Ari. Like I didn't think I would ever recover from the heartbreak of that. And I remember telling my professor, I want to study grief, and she's like, "You're such a happy person. Why would you ever want to study grief?" And I was I studied in the UK. So and I said, "No, I want to know what it takes to live again after you lose someone you love so deeply." And what I didn't know then was that ultimately this happened, and I ran away from the work, right? In the beginning, I ran away from it. I couldn't imagine possibly doing it. But yeah, so anyway, that's the type of personalities. I love them all. The people that you probably meet them along the way in the journey of your work often. And the way that I look at life reentry and all its stages, actually, it is meant for everyone who's going through something difficult and gets stuck in a place they don't want to be. The waiting room, in the way I talk about it, actually, I've turned down all these TEDx talks, and I finally, after all these years, said, I will apply for a TED talk. I just did this yesterday. For the first time, I was like, no, but it's time to do it. The waiting room has millions of people, and most of them are not people who have actually gone through tragic losses. They're ones that are staying there and die there, the ones that have the seemingly smaller less traditional and invisible losses, they're the ones, I nearly wrote a whole book about this, they're the losses that actually hijack our lives and ultimately, I'm going to use a strong word, kill us.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
So one of the things you talk about, as part of the quote that I read earlier, you said in the last line, I believe your future self is a work of art and that science can help you create it. So there's kind of this aspect of what you do that's art and aspect that's science. Can you talk a bit about what those two pieces of the puzzle are?
The science part, I fell in love with the science because I couldn't find solace and hope and action in the books of grief that were in my, now I believe, and I know I don't want to sound big-headed, but the work I've been doing for the last 8 years, it's a very action-oriented work based on science. Now we finally have books out there that are on grief specifically that bring science and talk about action. But action and rewiring our brain after loss is the only way to reinvent, the only way to re-enter. So you have the loops, the neural pathways that have been created to protect you after loss, because you just experienced something so traumatic that you're so afraid of going anywhere, trying anything new, that these maps and these loops of fear and anxiety are being created just to keep you safe. The science behind this has nothing to do with your heart, your heartbreak, grieving, mourning. Ari, I wanted to get up on the roofs of the houses and jump, like, and just scream. I'm not going to say anything about this. This has to do with the brain. And the ability, the brain's ability to take us from an old life to a new life and create a new story, a new narrative, a new beginning that is actually very different, and a new identity of who we are. The art part is the dance that you have to do between the old life and the new life, between going in the waiting room and coming out, because we don't just get out of the waiting room and never come back. We actually go back to rest. We go back to wait for a day. We need rest after we thrive, after we get out and get hurt again, right? There's something I wrote a while back that says that it's not the fear of loss, but the fear of losing it all again that keeps us in the waiting room. And that's a hard one. That's a really hard one.
Yeah. That's
what we try to fight against with our brain, not our heart.
So let's dig into the science piece a bit more. Can you talk a bit about what the science has shown as far as what actually happens in the brain with loss, with grief? And then I guess the second part of this will be, what does the science say about how to effectively rewire the brain out of that state?
So the science, so there's no studies that I have seen to date where it specifically says if you're in grief, where it's happening now, the study is beginning to study this work, which is based on brain science, to see what changes and how it does it. So the brain, in order to survive, it has to protect itself, right? What is that? That's the way we evolve. So we are fighting with evolution. We're against our own evolution. The brain will come in and say, Christina, you just went through something. And I always try to simplify it for people. Christina, Ari, you went through something really difficult, and now, therefore, we're going to stay in this, I call it the infinite loop of loss. We're going to rehash the story. We're going to go to the support group in my local hospital and where my doctor has sent me. And I'm going to stay there for 3 to 4 years, where I can meet other people who identify with the same story as me, because that's the only place I know that understands my pain and sorrow. The biggest waiting room in the world.
Yeah.
those support groups that are in every corner, churches, hospitals, organizations, everywhere. That moment, the brain gets very comfortable with that story. That's how we create complicated grief, actually. And people are going to come after me for this, I know, because complicated grief, you know, I mean, people talk a lot about that, and it's seen, you need medication, but the symptoms of complicated grief and the symptoms of the waiting room are the same. Mm. So we are living in that loop, in that pathway, and that, the amygdala, the fear center, actually expands and grows and becomes bigger. And it's actually not grief that keeps us in the waiting room, but the fear center of our brain, that it will not let us start again.
Yeah. You know, I think there's this interesting thing where kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, like time heals all wounds. Well, we also kind of have this narrative and this kind of cultural belief around the catharsis that happens with just speaking about, you know, just putting to words our experience, our pain, our sadness, our fears, whatever it is. But I think it is honestly possible to just, you can go to a support group or you know, do talk therapy, and you can continue to do it and continue to have cathartic conversations and cry and speak about your pains and your sadness and your fears and you know, all of the traumas and so on. And you can just continue to do that and do that and do that
forever,
week after week, forever, without actually ever rewiring the brain into a better.
Or re-entering. And this, and Ari, I'm so glad you said this. So the life reentry process begins with what I call the grief cleanse, and begins with stepping outside of the grief trance, and begins with really finding out, where are we? Because of that, re-traumatizing the self, of re-sharing the story. Actually, life reentry should not be allowed to with anyone. At least it has to be offered at least 6 months after the loss that has happened. The support groups, the resources that are out there in the world right now, are great for that first 6 months. Go. You have to share your story. You have to talk about what happened. We want that. There's no, that part. I was speaking to the Moyer Foundation, the #1 organization in the United States that actually helps 4,000 grieving children a year. And I hopefully, nothing yet, but hopefully we will work together on bringing life reentry children. But you know, I can't do life reentry unless there is the sharing, right? But when you stay in that place, that's how the complicated grief or the waiting room gets created. So there's something called grief cleanse, that as soon as life reentry begins, we actually cleanse everything, the stream of consciousness of everything that's there. And then you know what we do? We find the patterns that are being repeated in that stream of consciousness, Ari. Ari, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Well, if you wrote down, if you did a cleanse of everything that's in your head that bothers you, that's hard for you, what would you see as being repeated?
Oh, repeated. That's tough. There are a couple things that I want to mention. One is, for me, one big issue that I've always had is feeling like I don't know enough. You know, and especially in the health field, there's 10,000 studies published every day, and it is literally impossible to keep up with everything. And even if you made it your full-time job to do nothing else in your life, you know, you don't have to work at any job, you don't have to have fun or spend time with your family. All you do is read studies for 18 hours every day. It would still be impossible to keep up with all of the literature.
Yes.
So the body of knowledge is expanding at an exponential rate. And we have all these specialists. So there's always some specialist in some little narrow sliver of expertise who knows more about that topic than anybody else on the planet. And then there's somebody else in some other sliver that knows more about that topic, and so on for 1,000 other topics. And I've always had this feeling like I should be as much of an expert on all of those topics as all of those people are in their little sliver of expertise. And so there's this always this tension for me around that. Like I feel like I should know as much about everything as everyone does. And it's just not possible.
Would you say that the pattern or the theme that you may be seeing in your cleanse, if you did it, would be these two sentences that I'm hearing? Tell me which one sounds more correct. I can't keep up, and I can never be enough.
Yeah, the second one for sure.
Yes.
And it was very healing for me actually when I started meeting lots of our colleagues in the health space, other health experts and doctors, and having conversations with them and doing this podcast and interviewing people and realizing that there's lots of holes in their knowledge too.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, I'm not the only one who doesn't know a few things here and there, but everybody has holes in their knowledge and everybody's human basically. And so I've been able to heal that, kind of feeling of not knowing enough to a large degree from that. But yeah, that's definitely embedded into me.
Embedded. And tell me if this sounds right and the honest truth around this. My guess is that if there was a machine that could measure the data that you have in your head, Ari, versus someone else in your field, my guess is that you will have more data than the other person.
I mean, there are certainly other people out there who are very, very knowledgeable. I definitely don't want to come across as feeling like I know more than anyone, but I would say I'm in the upper echelon for sure.
Yes. So the reframing here is that actually, and we can actually find the proof of your data capture. And I'm using this word very specifically because you use the word study and you have knowledge that has been captured within you because your intention has always been, I need to know more so I can feel like I am enough. Mm-hmm. And because of that intention, you've actually built an incredible body of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the gift of that constant feeling of inadequacy, is that it's driven me to kind of study obsessively and actually know quite a bit.
And be an expert.
Yeah.
Of a lot of things. What would you say is the topic that you could see yourself as the top of that expert list that you know so much about?
I would say circadian rhythm is one, but hormesis is another one, which is the concept of metabolic stress, temporary metabolic stress, and how that impacts mitochondrial health and resilience to stress and resistance to disease and longevity and a whole bunch of other things. That's definitely one of my biggest areas of passion, and something that is kind of this weird paradox of very few people know what it is, and I saw your reaction when I mentioned the term. That's like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, because, but I'm not surprised you would respond with something like that because of the way that you are. You're incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Really?
But yeah, it's this paradox of something that not a lot of people know about, and yet there is actually a mountain of science suggesting that this is probably the single most important thing when it comes to longevity and resistance to disease. And so I've kind of had this, because of the fact that hardly anyone knows about it, and there's a mountain of science on it, it's led me to kind of really focus on that very obsessively.
And are you writing a book about that?
Yeah, I have a couple books in mind.
Yes, your next book, and it sounds like and then we ask people to reframe their cleanse, from going from I'm not enough or I could never be enough to actually being more than enough and the expert of your field.
Yeah. And
that's the truth. But the reason why I'm asking you those questions is that actually the brain, even though you deeply believe, if we took you outside of that loop in your mind, that is, as you said, ingrained in you, I think you used that word, because it's automatic. So it's actually taking place, Ari, without you really thinking about it. And it's actually educating your choices and decisions in your life. But if we step outside of that and rewire it consciously and tell ourselves a different narrative from that cleanse, we change, we re-enter and change our life. And underneath that loop that you shared, once we see through that, there's something else. That's the part that is invisible, because that loop has been standing there. Is actually, when we find that part, the invisible part is the most liberating thing in the world. We exit once and for all from that gap, that place in between. So yes, we start from a moment of impact. We start from the moment of something dramatic and terrible happening in our lives. But the work of life reentry is more about discovering what's keeping us in this automatic hypnosis of living our life in a place of a fear-based experience.
Yeah.
And that allows us to be stuck forever.
Yeah. It's fascinating. What does this actually look like? Actually, before I go there, I have another question. You've mentioned a couple times invisible losses.
Yes.
And I'm wondering to what extent small experiences of trauma or loss, for example, something as simple as a girlfriend or boyfriend breaking up with you or something like that.
Yes.
Or getting fired from a job that you really loved, or, some kind of friendship,
yes,
combusting, or whatever it is, but not necessarily losing, suffering a loss to the degree that you have, where you've lost a husband, a life partner who you envision spending the rest of your life with, and you just, who was so much of your world. That's just absolutely devastating. But what about these small losses? Are these kind of engaging the same physiology and the same aspects of, they're rewiring the brain in the same way, but to a smaller degree?
Actually, my answer will surprise you and your listeners. They're harder.
Oh, wow.
I know. And more dangerous than a dramatic, catastrophic loss.
In what way?
And I know it's such a controversial thing to say, but that's okay. When you have been living, sorry to ask you, Ari, actually your loop, is that okay if I just refer to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you sure?
Yes. Yeah. And in my clinical psychology PhD program, I did lots of this. I'm very comfortable.
Awesome. I love it. So that am I enough question, I'm not enough statement actually comes from another place, not from your field, not from looking at all those people around you that are in your industry. It's coming from somewhere else. And I bet you anything you want, you already know the answer to that.
I'm not sure I know where you're going with this.
Think about the past. Think about an earlier time in your life as a child that you felt that in a relationship or in a situation, like there was a time, you see, you knew immediately.
Yes. So I would say probably with my dad, always feeling like, and I was the youngest of 3 kids in the family. And there were big age gaps. So my older brother, the middle one, is 5 years older. And then my older sister is 4 years older than that. And so they're, when they were kids capable of having a conversation and carrying on, kind of intelligent discussion at the dinner table, I was still a little kid, kind of barely putting together coherent thoughts. And so I grew up kind of always feeling like they didn't listen to me. And this is actually kind of a joke in the family, and it's lighthearted. I don't have any deep feelings of trauma from this anymore, or sadness around it or anything like that. But it's kind of like a joke in the family, like, oh, nobody listens to the little one, and so I kind of grew up feeling like my opinions and thoughts weren't important or didn't matter. And so I felt this, I think as a counter response to that, I felt this enormous need to develop really impressive thoughts and knowledge to kind of demand people's attention and be like, here's like, I actually really know what I'm talking about, and like, you better pay attention to me.
Yeah. And so this is what I'm hearing. And I'm hearing you say that the people in your family at the table didn't come to you for answers, right? Mm-hmm. And also the sentence that you actually said in the beginning of my question was that you can't keep up is also present here, because you couldn't keep up because they were older than you. You couldn't keep up because you hadn't developed enough to keep up with their level of conversation.
Yeah.
So the invisible map is that map that people would choose to go somewhere else for the answers. They wouldn't come to you. They wouldn't consider you as the authority, even though that map actually has been, the best way to say it, has been shattered by your expertise and by your incredible quest to be the expert. If we were to look inside your brain, which map do you think would be the strongest?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably still the I don't know enough
Yes.
map.
Yes.
Even though I've gotten to a place where I really have, I'm very much at peace with it. I don't operate from this sort of fear and sense of inadequacy anymore. I see the gift in it, and I kind of pursue greater knowledge obsessively still, but I do so from a place of being very comfortable and confident with the level of knowledge that I'm already at.
But what if, Ari, actually, because you still go after the knowledge in the way that you are, that's the map that's operating still underneath, right? And what if you are ready to be without any more knowledge? What if you've learned everything you needed to know to help millions of people already? That's uncomfortable, right?
Yes. Definitely. Yes. The idea of just saying that I know enough and I'm good at this, I don't need to learn anymore, is not good. And especially because I don't want to digress too much here, but I have seen a number of especially doctors that I know. Like, I'll give an example of a doctor here in San Diego that I grew up seeing as a kid, that's been around in the preventive medicine field since the 1970s. He was kind of one of the pioneers of talking about like being healthy and preventing disease before being healthy was cool and before anyone cared about it. And so you'd think somebody who's been doing it since the 1970s, who's an MD, who's got all this specialization in preventive medicine and Eastern medicine training and all these other, specializations in nutrition and so on, you'd think that he has by now just accumulated this enormous body of knowledge that just would blow anybody out of the water. But in fact, what has happened, and what I see happen all the time with health experts and doctors, is they get to a place where they feel comfortable with their level of knowledge, and then they just stay there. And I mean, if I look at this person, just to name one example of this phenomenon, his level of knowledge and his recommendations honestly haven't changed probably at all since 1985, So, I mean, there's a lot of people like that. And that's, for me, that's a big problem. I always endeavor for that not to happen to me, and always to.
And it could never happen to you.
To stay on the forefront of knowledge.
And you're the opposite of that, right? You're the complete opposite. But I think that you are definitely the expert. I wish I was your patient, right? I wish I was coming to your office and you could help my whole family and all the people that I love, and we'd find ourselves in the most healthy place. But this is a great example of what, though, educates us and moves us to action. And yes, you took it and did something incredible, amazing with it. You became the expert, so you don't feel like that. But a lot of people live in that place of infinite automatic thoughts of invisible experiences. And you asked me in the beginning, what are some of these examples? And that's one example, not being heard at the table. Another example, that's your invisible loss. Someone there?
Yeah. No, I was just checking the time to make sure that we're good on time.
Okay. Another invisible loss would be someone leaving you as a teenager, being bullied at school. I had a father email me once. He went home to find his 16-year-old daughter hanging from, because she was bullied at school and she didn't tell anyone. And the bullying is not, nobody's pulling her hair or beating her up, but it was a verbal, quiet experience that she kept inside of her invisibly. So her grief didn't come from Ari from losing a person. It came from that experience of being bullied quietly when nobody saw anything. And she didn't share. She didn't tell anyone, and she hung herself.
Wow.
And there are thousands of stories like that. This is just one that was shared with me. But those invisible losses are deadly. And they operate behind the scenes inside of our brain every single day.
Yeah. So what does this process look like? And I think this is a very big question, and this will probably be the wrap up.
Yes.
But there's 5 stages of life reentry. And this is, I think, encompasses the art and the science aspect of life reentry. And you're incorporating the art side of it, but it's also kind of a practical guide to how to rewire your brain to get to re-enter life. So can you give kind of an overview of what these 5 stages involve?
The 5 stages. First one is the stage of getting real. Because when you don't know what's operating underneath, what is the real grief? What is the real loss? You're an automatic pilot talking about losing your spouse or your child or a traditional loss actually will not get us to reentry. So we have to understand what's operating underneath that place. Step 2 is what I call, this is my favorite, the most fun place actually, called the plug-in. And I named it like that, Ari, because literally we plug in for the first time into the new life that has been waiting for us. And we do it only at 5%, because I learned after working with a lot of people that when we try to leap really high and jump really far, we actually run back to the waiting room and we hide and we never want to go out. So we're sneaking around the fear center, sneaking out of it. And so we are doing things that are new for our new life, but not things that make us afraid in the beginning. So we are rewiring and we're sneaking out of our fear center in the waiting room really carefully in the beginning. Actually, I tell people don't leap too high. Small. If that makes you afraid, we're not going to do it. So that's how we start. And people love it. Then, of course, they increase slowly, and 7%, 10%. So we keep training our brain. And then the next step is the shifting of the mind, the reframing, actually, I am the expert. And not just saying it. Actually, our actions or our plugins that I call operate under that new language and new way of describing our life and ourselves. And in the class, you actually see every narrative changing, Ari. Wow. The sea of new thoughts. Sorry to talk about you. You're no longer trying to become the most knowledgeable expert, but you're out there helping more people. And that's the focus, right? Still learning, but the focus is about how do I get all this knowledge to the people? How do I go out in the world? People are going from feeling afraid to I'm ready to take on life. And you see, that's when we lose the people I told you about. Remember in the beginning I said we're going to lose some people?
Yeah.
They can't make it further.
Yeah.
They can't change the narrative.
Yeah, there's something there, and I just to digress a bit in this point, there's something in this transition, and you can probably put better words to this than I can, but this transition from living in fear and living identified as a victim to getting to a place where you are actually giving back to
Yes. Yes.
and because that's actually, it is its own kind of scary thing to get up and say, here's what I think. I'm going to go help people with this. And I have these beliefs and I have this knowledge and I think this is the right way to do things. It's scary because you have the potential to take on a lot of criticism of people saying, no, you're doing it wrong and you're a quack and that's not the right way to do things. Right. So they almost feel like polar opposites to me, to live identified as a victim and addicted to your own suffering versus transitioning to a place where you've transitioned so far away from identification with the victimhood to as a result of my bad experiences, I'm now going to go and help other people.
Do you know how many people actually get there? I have people every day who reach out to me, how can I be like you? How can I write books? I now want to help people. Actually, as a matter of fact, and I'm always very transparent, direct. I just had an event in Phoenix and to help people, to help people re-enter, and half the people of that room wanted to become practitioners, and we said no, because we want our practitioners to be doctors, therapists. We want life reentry to be given now to that higher level. But ultimately, people want to help others. They want to help others because of the compassion that's being created after experiencing their own sorrow.
Beautiful.
And one day, we all go through loss. It's 100% of us will experience devastating losses. You'll come back to this conversation and look at it even from a different place, right? Because that's how people who, I used to be a grief therapist before I experienced this. And I was like, afterwards I was like, oh my God, how did I sit in a group facilitating people who've lost their spouses without knowing what it was like? And it was like, grief is like moving to a different planet, becoming an alien species. Anyway, changing from the victim to, and we're doing it slowly. So we don't go from victim to victor, right? We go from victim to maybe I want to try again, to I want to start something new. I want to have a new hobby. I want to get my coffee at a different place. Maybe I'm not too bad. Maybe I do have an idea that can help my friend. Maybe I can write 5 words to share with someone. So that's shifting, and we're doing it at very small intervals. Then the next thing is discovery.
What's that all about?
That's number 4. And who you used to be before the loss is not here. It's gone. And people are trying to go back to that ghost life that doesn't exist anymore with the old identity, and it doesn't work. That's also what keeps them in the waiting room. And number 5 is reentry. Literally, we actually are, there was a gap in the industry, coaches and therapists. So people either went to a therapist or went to a coach. And if you go from having therapy to then go to a coach, you go from like just telling your story to what's the biggest goal you could ever have in your life? Let's go and make your dreams come true. That doesn't work at all from someone who's gone through something really difficult. So we are in that, life reentry sits in the middle. And all we do is take people who never made it to the other side, literally walk them from that gap into the door to their new life. And that's what life reentry is.
Beautiful. You have one more quote that I want to read here, and one more thing I want to mention in this podcast, and I'd like you to speak to. So this quote says, or you said, I should say, in your book, ultimately, living a truly unapologetic life is about being proud to feel alive after a terrible loss. It's about being able to tell guilt that it's time to leave because you're ready to re-enter your life and start living again. This is a fascinating concept, but I think it gets at this feeling that sometimes we have that we're almost doing good, or we're honoring a bad experience, or we're honoring a loss, or we're communicating to the people around us how much we've suffered. in this sort of, or whatever, we're kind of honoring this loss by being sad and unhappy and being miserable. We feel compelled to be miserable in a way to honor the loss.
Yes.
How does one get over that need to self-inflict suffering?
Yes.
As a way of like paying back this loss, or showing this person that we've lost how much they've meant to us?
Yeah, this is a very good, Ari. This is a great question, and this is what holds people back the most. Guilt and shame. Guilt for, I can't laugh. I remember the first time I laughed, I cried immediately after. I just went like this. Yeah. How could I possibly laugh? I need to like punish myself for suffering. Dude, he died. Yeah. he was 35 years old and died, and he can't live life. And many people have this guilt and shame for even daring dating again, or I'm remarried to a wonderful human being. I had to buy a wedding dress. I mean, imagine that moment. It's like, how can I put it on? It's impossible. But yes, that is a big part of the stuckness in the waiting room and the guilt and shame. But when we shift the whole culture to actually use the word life reentry as part of the social norm, we are supposed to evolve. Grief is an evolutionary experience and our evolutionary advantage. And without that, we wouldn't be the species that we are. I believe in this with all my heart. And there's one quote that is my favorite. That's the number one quote that people find my work actually. And it is, you can do the impossible because you've been through the unthinkable.
Love that.
And it is true. It is so true. You've survived something so terrible. You can do anything you want. You have nothing to lose. You're at the rock bottom arena. And that's when when I was chasing, and I will end this with this, when I was chasing down the mailman. I didn't care if the neighbors thought I was a crazy widow living in the house over the hill over there. I didn't care what they thought. I lost everything. Who gives a shit what anyone thinks? And you go after anything, everything you want to create a new life. Actually, you should. As a matter of fact, I'm spending the rest of my life making sure that nobody's left behind. Oh,
beautiful. I absolutely love that. I am a huge fan of your work,
of your book,
of everything that you're doing. And this has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to do this interview with you. And I look forward to more conversations with you. This has been a blast, and I think such an important conversation of a topic that is damaging the health in my audience, the focused on fatigue and energy levels.
Yes.
is a major source of chronic fatigue for a lot of people. And so I think this is just a critically important topic that has the potential to help so many people. So to end, I would love to just let people know where they can find out more about your work and what you're doing. Obviously, I highly recommend everybody listening to go out and buy your book off Amazon, Second Firsts. And so go get that, Christina Rasmussen, Second First, get it on Amazon. But people should also go to your website, sign up. I know you have another book coming out very soon. We'll have to do another podcast.
I know. That's about physics. You're going to love it. Cool. I am like you. I want to learn all the time because I feel like, we are so alike. We'll have another conversation about this, but yes, another book.
Beautiful. So your website is?
So ChristinaRasmussen.com, secondfirst.com, lifereentry.com. And I do have a hobby, which is about space. And we actually have a pretty cool space platform called starletters.com that is just fun about space exploration. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Christina. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again sometime soon.
Thank you, Ari, so much for having me.